Hello, English students of the world, or perhaps just of Old Saybrook High School, but maybe this will go viral and all of the English students in the world will see it. You never know. Well, this is Dr. Donnelly, and I am here to talk to you guys about integrating evidence into your literary analysis paragraphs or essays or whatever you need to write. So we've been talking about perfect paragraphs. And we've been talking about the three pieces that you need in a perfect paragraph. You need to identify it, right? Whatever your main idea is, you need to identify it. You need to prove it. Whatever you're saying is your main idea, you need to back it up with something like text evidence. And you also need to bring it back around, or biba, as I like to say. So when we work on integrating text evidence, we're working in the prove it part of your essay, right? Because to prove it, you need text evidence, and we don't want that text evidence to be stranded on an island somewhere by itself. We want it to be fully integrated into the text. So I've got all my categories. I know what I need to do. I'm actually going to just leave them there on the screen. You don't need to leave them there when you're writing your paragraph. You can just write one continuous paragraph, but I'm going to leave them there so we know kind of what I'm up to, what I'm doing. I'm going to start by identifying it. And that it is whatever I've asked you to do, or whatever a question on a test, or you can use this strategy in other classes. You can use it in social studies. You can use it in science. Whatever the question asks you is the it. So for this task, we're identifying what the conflict is in the Lorax. So it is the conflict in the Lorax. I'm remembering back to class. I'm remembering that the main conflict is between the old Onceler, right, who kind of represents taking natural resources and selling them to make money, and the Lorax, right, who represents kind of the natural resources themselves and what they want. So he represents the Thneeds, not the Thneeds, the Thneeds are the bad things, the Truffaut trees and the barbaloos and all the other natural things, right? So I'm going to start by identifying it. If I have to identify the conflict in the Lorax, I'm going to say the central conflict in the Lorax is between the old Onceler, who sells not natural things. He sells, he makes things out of natural resources and sells them, and the Lorax, who represent, or who speaks for, right? He uses the language speaks for, who speaks for the natural world, right? So now I've identified that central conflict. For identify it for my topic sentence, I only need one sentence. Now I need to prove it, right? So I'm going to say that the first, fight, the first conflict between these two characters arises here, right? When the Lorax shows up and he says, "Mister," he says with a sawdusty sneeze, "I am the Lorax. I speak for the trees. I speak for the trees have no tongues, and I'm asking you, sir, at the top of my lungs." He was very upset, and he shouted and puffed, "What's that thing you've made out of my Truffula tuft?" So, when Dr. Seuss introduces the Lorax, he yells at the old Onceler. Okay, I'm giving some context for my quotes. We call this context, right? Because it tells me what's happening in the text, right? So we know when I say introduces the Lorax, that this is the first time we're meeting this character. I can even say the character of the Lorax. And when I say he yells at old Onceler, the quote that I'm going to put in is going to make a lot more sense if I say who he's talking to, what he's talking about, right? He says, "I speak for the trees. That doesn't give all the information I need. Maybe I'm going to say, and asks what's, I'm quoting from here, that thing you've made out of my truffaut. Okay, I need to put the page number too that I took that from. So that's from page 23. Now I want to show that there's a conflict, right? So I have the Lorax yelling at Old Onceler, and then I should probably have the Old Onceler responding, right? So let me see what's a good quote that would show that they have a conflict. Okay, you poor stupid guy. Okay, so I'm going to integrate that quote. However, the Old Onceler ignores the Lorax and calls him a stupid guy. I have to put a page number there. So that's from page 26. I see that here. So I'm going to put 26. Now I can go on to explain a little bit more about this evidence, right? But the important thing to note here is how I integrated it. I gave some context, right? This is my context, right? Because I say what's happening when these quotes take place. I say who's talking, right? The other thing that I do is I make sure my quotes go in a complete sentence, right? That incorporates the quotes. So it says, he says, I speak for the trees, and asks, what's the thing you've made out of my truffaut tuft, right? Same thing here, right? However, the Old Onceler ignores the Lorax and calls him a, quote, stupid guy. So I don't need to pull this whole page out, right? I can just pull out a couple of words from it to really express that conflict, and I can integrate them into my sentence, which means I can make them kind of part of my sentence. So tomorrow we're going to write some paragraphs about the Lorax. We're going to write a paragraph about the conflict in the Lorax, and we're going to write a paragraph about the theme in the Lorax. As you're writing those paragraphs, I want you to make sure that you integrate your quotes, right? By giving some context, by saying what's happening in the story before the quote actually comes about, or when the quote actually comes about, and to blend them into this sentence, right? To say, he says, and then put your quote, or and asks, and then put your quote, or like this one where it's all blended in together, right? However, the Old Onceler ignores the Lorax that tells the reader what's going on in the text, and then calls him a stupid guy. So I don't want to see any quotes on islands, any quotes all by themselves. I do want to see quotes with context and quotes that are integrated into a sentence. Okay? And then from there, you'll bring it back around and you'll be writing a swell paragraph. So be ready to integrate your quotes tomorrow, give context, and integrate them into a sentence when we write our paragraphs. All right, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.